a long way since I believe in anything. Not come halfway around the world. What are you talking about? Where you come from is gone. Where you thought you were going to was never there. And where you are ain't no good unless you can get away from it. You understand? Yeah. You understand? Yeah.
There's only one thing left for me to do, Mama. I gotta sing a ding-dang, my dang a long.
Alright, enough of that. Hello there, CriterioNate here, number 470. John Huston's Wise Blood. 1979, 106 minutes, color, black and white monaural, and that music you heard at the beginning was, and I do call it music, Ministry's Jesus Built My Hot Rod, the red line, white line version, which samples this movie quite extensively. Basically all the samples in the introduction are more or less from this movie, and so when I started hearing them, I was like, wait a minute, this is that movie. I'm like, huh. So I gotta wonder how Al Jorgensen came about this movie. Anyway, just as like, there's my introduction. There it is. Play Ministry. Get you guys hip to the groove, Anyway, now, that's the one thing I liked about this movie, was that that Ministry sampled it. So I recognize, Brad Dourif is great too. I love Brad Dourif. I know him, a lot of people know him from, he's been in a bunch of different movies. He was in a classic episode of The X-Files. But I personally got hip to him. I don't know if any of you guys have ever played the computer game Myst. But the third game in the series features Brad Dourif as the villain, Savidro. And so I like seeing him in anything else ever since then, because I remember playing it all the time when I was younger, and still I got to play it again. I thought I had it somewhere in here, but anyway. So that being said, I can't give this movie a complete pass. For those of you, for those of you who have seen this movie, well, I'll mention it at the end. And this is just me. Well, it's not just me. Anyway. Plot. We got Brad Dourif plays Hazel Motes. And he's this guy who's in the war. He comes home, and I guess his house is like ransacked or whatever and all that. They don't say what war he left and all that, but he came home and he goes into town, and he goes into the town of Talkenham, and he tries to get a room. He ends up sleeping with this woman who I guess is like a good time house and all that. Gentlemen come in and out for $4 and all that. And he meets a preacher on the street, a blind preacher, and his daughter, whose names I cannot remember. The blind preacher is Asa Hawks, played by the late great Harry Dean Stanton, and Sabbath Lily, played by Amy Wright. And while he's there, he also meets a young man named Enoch Emery, played by Dan Shore. And he's just really disillusioned by religion and all that. And I guess you could say that Hazel's kind of an atheist. So he gets this idea to start his own church, the Church of Christ without Christ, or something like that. And he tries to he starts preaching atheism, I guess. And so and a lot of people keep calling him a preacher due to his hat, the hat he wears. And he at the beginning of the movie keeps telling him, I'm not a goddamn preacher, Enoch is kind of his sidekick, even though he doesn't want anything to do with Hazel, doesn't want anything to do with him. And he drags him because he wants to see the monkey. He has an obsession with monkeys. And in some random, there's a random story where he ends up like Enoch ends up wanting to see this gorilla, the Gorga or something like that. It's just a man in a monkey suit, and he wants to try and talk to him, and he ends up stealing the suit at one point and scaring a couple, an older couple, and he ain't playing with a full deck. You know. But anyway, Hazel ends up finding out where Asa and Sabbath Lily live, and he ends up getting a room in the same boarding house, and so just so he can like torment them, because he knows that he's fake, and we find out that Asa's actually not blind. He's a complete fake. All the clippings that he has, his story are falsified. But Hazel vows to take this guy down. Meanwhile, Lily ends up falling for Hazel, trying to seduce him and all that. And at first he's very against against her being there, and eventually they end up going to bed together. And then later on, Enoch gets into his head. I guess Hazel, and Enoch are talking, and Enoch gets into his head that they need a new Jesus. There needs to be like some new Jesus, and so he ends up going to this library and breaking and stealing this like old mummified shrunken man, and that's the thing that they're gonna worship to now. So he shows Hazel it earlier, and Hazel's like, "Why the hell are you showing me all this?" And so anyway, he brings it to Lily, and Lily treats it as her baby. And when Hazel sees it, he recognizes it. He breaks it and throws it out the window, and Lily gets really upset and all that. That being said, now it's like Hazel meets all these people, and he really doesn't care about anything but his car. Early in the movie, he buys a car, and this becomes this is his Jesus, this car, because that's where all the samples. Nobody with a good car needs to be justified, and all that kind of thing. He keeps calling it a good car, even though it's a piece of crap. And he gets little repairs to it here and there, but it eventually keeps breaking down further and further. And so, but he believes in this car. He keeps wanting to believe in this car. At one point, he ends up meeting this con man named Hoover Schultz, played by Ned Beatty, and he basically steals Hazel's idea of a church without Christ. Gets this guy who kind of looks like Hazel to start preaching, and he ends up playing. Hoover plays a guitar to try and get people to come, because originally Hoover tries to meddle in on Hazel's idea, and Hazel doesn't want anything to do with him. And so later on, Hazel ends up finding the preacher guy that Hoover hired, and confronting him and telling him not to do anything. Don't mess with why are you preaching something against something you believe in, and all that. Ends up pushing his car off the road, and then later on ended up running over the preacher as he's walking down the road. And so later on, I guess what happens is I think the police end up catching up to Hazel, because later on Hazel ends up getting pulled over, and they end up, the sheriff or whatever, the policeman ends up making him follow Hazel to a point, and he gets out of the car, and the policeman ends up putting the car in a drive and pushing the car, turning the wheel and kicking the car, so that the car goes all the way down a hill and falls into the lake. So at this point, Hazel, I guess, is lost, and so when he comes back to the boarding home, he goes into the kitchen, gets a bucket of water, takes it into his room, and blinds himself for real. Lily's screaming her head off. He blinded himself! Oh my God! They end up leaving. The landlady ends up, becoming his caretaker, and eventually she tells him that the only way he's going to be able to stay there at this point is if they get married, because she ends up, I guess, liking him and because he's his caretaker, I guess she wants him for all time or whatever. I don't know. And so he ends up leaving. And going out in the rain because he doesn't want anything to do with her at this point. However, but she ends up calling the police, and they're on the look for him. And he's found like under railroad tracks or something. They bring him back and he brings her back. They bring him back to the boarding home, and yeah, I guess the movie just kind of ends with her. I think he ends up dying actually in her arms, and that's basically the movie. That's the movie. The only other cast member I'll mention is John Huston himself, who plays Hazel's grandfather. There's a scene where he has these nightmares about his grandfather preaching to Hazel when he was a kid, and John Huston himself gets up and comes in front of the camera and does his thing. So interesting. So yeah, it's based on a novel by Flannery O'Connor, and I guess according to Wikipedia, it was done relatively faithful. There's a little more humor brought into the book than I guess brought in the movie that was in the book. Now that being said, it was an interesting movie and it was funny at times. It was kind of funny at times, and Brad Dourif was fantastic, and I love the samples that they used, but they use the N-word quite a bit in this movie, and I can't let that fly. I don't know if... I'm assuming that Flannery O'Connor uses the N-word in the book, which if that's the case, then obviously, well, why would you make a movie about this? I don't know. It doesn't make sense to me, and it's not right. So I can't give this movie a pass because they don't say it a hell of a lot, but they do like at least 8 or 9 times, and that's 8 or 9 times too many, honestly. It's like they says foreigners and N-words. It's like everybody's racist, and I mean they're Southern, so all the Southern. There's a lot of racist people in the South, I guess it's just the way, That being said, it's still an interesting movie. It's not necessarily a good movie, but it's interesting. It's got an interesting storyline. Just the racism is really hard to swallow. So, that being said, I'm going to give it a C. No, wait, no, I'm not going to give it a C. Because if that racism wasn't there, I would give it an A. But just hearing that, just C+. C+. I'm going to be a little generous. C+. Again, the actors are great. The language, I didn't like it. And John Huston is this big director, and we've seen one of his movies, Under the Volcano, earlier this season, and so I don't understand. And this was 1979, It's like, God. What if I went into a theater and decided to watch this film back in 1979? What am I supposed to think? Well, they probably wouldn't even let me in, but whatever. Anyway. So, there it is. Wise Blood, I won't say any more about this movie. Wise Blood, C+. It is what it is. Supplements. There's a new interview with Brad Dourif, as well as the writers Benedict Fitzgerald and Michael Fitzgerald. And there's also an archival audio of Flannery O'Connor reading her story, A Good Man is Hard to Find. And there's also an episode of the show Creativity with Bill Moyers from the 1980s, featuring an interview with John Huston around the time he was making Annie. So there's footage of Annie, and that was neat. I liked that. I almost want to pick it up just for that, because I love when Criterion puts these old episodes of the BBC shows and PBS, and I was like, those are absolutely amazing. I love archival episodes like that, yeah. good. That was really good. And so, and this trailer, and that's it. So, Wise Blood C+. Fuck the language. I know. Anyway, so that's it for me for a little while. I'll be back later this week. No, I'll be back maybe Tuesday. Possibly Wednesday. Possibly even Thursday. I don't know what my schedule is. My schedule's all over the place right now. But yeah, so tomorrow the Eclipser's coming in. I'm going to do this thing. Hang on. Prepare this mess. Going to do his thing with the Alexander Corda's private lives. And then later on this week, I'm still waiting on the Friends of Eddie Coyle, but that's the least of our work, because next is and this isn't the proper package, but we got the Pigs, Pimps, and Prostitutes set with the which I'm hoping Pigs, Pimps, and Pigs and Battleships Tuesday. In a perfect world, the Insect Women on Wednesday, and Intentions of Murder on Thursday. However, there's a lot of supplements, so I can't guarantee it. But we'll see. We'll see we'll see what my timing's like and all that good stuff. So, and then so I've also then after that we'll have the Friends of Eddie Coyle, which when that comes in, and then after that we got Curious Case of Benjamin Button. And Bergman Island, which we've, again, I've mentioned this, we've already seen. I reviewed this as part of the Seventh Seal review, because it's included in the most recent reissue of the Seventh Seal. So there you go. You got 2 Criterions for the price of 1. But we'll do it again. We'll just give him his time. It's not a very long one either, so. I don't know what's after this, but if we have time, I'll go ahead and knock it out. If I have time during that day to do 2, maybe we'll do 2 that day. Probably not though, because I want to have time for my other projects. But anyway, gosh, it's a long one. I guess it took me a while to do the plot, which I know. Yeah. Anyway, that's it for me. Thank you for watching. Don't use the N-word, and don't force Jesus upon anyone, and get a good car. And that's it for me. Thank you for watching, and the Eclipser will see you all tomorrow for Alexander Corda's Private Lives, and I will see you all, fingers crossed, on Tuesday for Pigs and Battleships. And until then, goodbye.